Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I've got the Minecraft world loaded up in the background, perfect for settling in while we dive into today's chaos. As always, before we begin, thank you for watching my videos. We have now passed an additional 120 subscribers since the day that I started these videos. Seeing you guys commenting on my videos really keep me motivated and going. But now, let's dive in, because you won't believe this story. Imagine finding out the person you trusted most has been secretly recording your private love life and uploading it online. It's almost funny how perfectly it backfired, because every single thing he thought was hidden ends up being the very evidence that destroys him, and that's just the beginning. The betrayals spiral, the revenge gets sharper, and the poetic justice practically writes itself. So let's jump right into the first story, where a girlfriend's discovery turns into the kind of downfall you can't look away from. It started on a random Tuesday night, the kind where nothing exciting was supposed to happen. My laptop was stuck on endless updates, so I grabbed my boyfriend's instead. He'd left it open on the desk, no password to enter, so I figured I'd just log in and stream a movie in bed. That's when I saw it, a weird folder tucked away in the corner of his desktop with a boring name like Taxes 2021. I wouldn't have thought much of it except there were three identical folders scattered across different drives. Who duplicates tax files? Curiosity tugged at me. I clicked, and my stomach dropped. The folder wasn't about taxes at all. Inside were hundreds of videos, private videos, videos of me. Our bedroom, our couch, even the weekend getaway where I thought we'd made sweet, innocent memories. Every moment had been recorded without my knowledge, and worse, he had uploaded them. I could see titles edited, tags attached, and usernames linked to sites I didn't recognize. A few clicks later, I found whole forums full of them. Intimate moments of mine, shared with strangers. My blood ran cold. I didn't scream. I didn't slam the laptop shut. Instead, I froze, cycling between shock, anger, and something sharper. Resolve. If I lost control in the moment, I'd lose the only chance to burn him down properly. So I started documenting every single file, every account, every IP address that tied back to him. I took screenshots, copied links, even recorded myself scrolling on his device so no one could claim I faked it. It was humiliating, painstaking, soul-crushing work. But I wanted my case airtight. If I went down, I was going to drag him with me. For days, I carried the weight alone. He carried on like nothing was wrong, making dinner, asking about my day, leaning over to kiss me while I catalogued his betrayal behind his back. It was surreal, like I was living in a parallel universe where he thought he was untouchable. But that wasn't even the worst part. I found his chat logs. He bragged. He described me in disgusting detail to strangers, laughing about how I didn't even know I was famous online. The arrogance practically dripped off the screen. And then came the part that made me sick all over again. One of his co-workers was in those same chats. I pieced it together from usernames and context. They were sharing my private life and joking about whether I'd ever find out. The smugness was unbearable, but it gave me exactly what I needed. Witnesses, people who could confirm his behavior if it ever came down to it. When I had everything, I picked my battlefield carefully. I wasn't going to waste my rage on a screaming match in our apartment. No. This was going to be surgical. First, I emailed his HR department, attaching every log of him bragging to female co-workers. Then, I sent a folder of evidence to his parents with a simple note. This is what your son has been doing behind my back. Finally, I submitted takedown requests to every shady site I could reach, armed with proof that those videos were non-consensual. By the time the storm hit, he didn't even know where it was coming from. The first blow landed at work. HR called him into a meeting where those same co-workers confirmed what he'd bragged about. The second came when his mother called him sobbing, demanding to know how he could do something so vile. The third came from his friends who started texting him that they wanted nothing to do with him. Every wall he thought he had started collapsing at once. He stumbled home pale, sweating, clutching his phone like it might save him. He dropped to his knees in front of me, begging for forgiveness. He swore it had just been a phase, that he'd stop, that he didn't mean to hurt me. Tears streamed down his face as he promised to delete everything and change. But I knew crocodile tears when I saw them. Men like him don't regret the harm. They regret getting caught. Then came the breaking point. I slid a folder across the table, neatly organized with every shred of evidence. His face drained as he flipped through it, realizing just how thoroughly I'd dismantled his secret world. And then I said the words that sealed his fate. I'm pressing charges. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He had built an entire empire of exploitation, and I had just turned it into his noose. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you're watching from, because the storm only gets worse. The aftermath was fast and brutal. HR terminated him for harassment and misconduct, citing the confirmation from female staff he had involved. His parents cut ties, ashamed. His so-called friends ghosted him. Online, his accounts were deleted one by one as takedown requests gutted his smug digital trail. And me. I walked away free, holding my head high, while he became a pariah with no job, no family, no friends. He tried to make me a victim, and instead I turned him into a cautionary tale. Honestly, his stupidity still amazes me. He built a shrine to his ego, and all I had to do was flip the lights on so everyone could see the rot. He thought he was untouchable, but really he was just handing me the rope to hang him with. This wasn't just revenge, it was poetic justice with receipts. But if you think that's cruel, what happens when the betrayal is hidden in your own workplace? It started with a subtle change, one of those things you almost convince yourself you imagined. I worked in the finance department, nothing glamorous, just spreadsheets, reports, reconciling accounts. My coworker, let's call him Travis, had always been a little smug. He'd brag about cutting corners to get ahead, but it was the kind of office banter you roll your eyes at and move on. Then one afternoon, I noticed something off in one of our shared ledgers. A formula had been changed, tiny, almost invisible, except it made me look like I'd mishandled several $1,000s. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe Travis accidentally overwrote the file, but that wasn't even the worst part. When I cross-checked the logs, the edit was time-stamped for a time when I wasn't even in the office. My name was on the record, but the activity didn't match my login habits. That little flicker of doubt in my stomach turned into a steady burn. And here's where it gets absurd. A week later, my manager called me in for a serious discussion. Apparently, multiple discrepancies had been flagged, all tied to me. Travis sat in the meeting too, pretending to look concerned. He even chimed in with a fake supportive line, "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding." The audacity of that performance almost made me laugh. Like, imagine setting the fire yourself and then showing up with a tiny water bottle, offering to help put it out. I played it cool though. Before that meeting, I'd already started backing up every version of those spreadsheets, saving timestamps, keeping copies off the company drive. If Travis wanted to make me look guilty, I wasn't about to let him control the evidence. And then came the breaking point. He got sloppy. He'd been adjusting numbers in a rush, and one file showed the same transaction, duplicated with different outcomes, one clean, one doctored. It was amateur hour fraud, and the receipts were piling up. But things went from bad to unhinged when Travis accidentally sent a message to the wrong group chat. Instead of DMing one of his buddies, it landed in the main finance thread where the entire department could see it. The message read, "Don't worry, once OP is gone, I'll finally get promoted." Just need to keep pushing the narrative. You could feel the air get sucked out of the room as notifications lit up. He realized immediately what he'd done, but by then half the team had already read it. Oh, so we're doing that now? Trying to frame someone for fraud while also monologuing like a cartoon villain? It felt like I was watching him write his own confession in real time. The investigation wrapped faster than I expected. I was called into another meeting, this time with HR, management, and Travis. He tried to double down, claiming his message was taken out of context and that the files had been compromised. That's when I slid my neat folder across the table. Every version of the documents, every backup with timestamp metadata, lined up in chronological order. And for the cherry on top, the side-by-side screenshots showing his duplicate edits. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. Travis actually tried to accuse me of hacking his account. He said I must have set him up, like I somehow orchestrated both his sloppy math and his incriminating text message. The HR rep raised an eyebrow so high it practically disappeared into her hairline. You could almost hear the collective thought in the room. This guy just buried himself. And suddenly the whole plan fell apart. HR confirmed the edits matched his login credentials. IT confirmed there was no hacking. The text message was undeniable. Within minutes, the tone shifted from serious investigation to termination paperwork. Travis's face went pale as my manager read off the charges: falsifying financial records, attempting to frame another employee, and gross misconduct. He was fired on the spot. I walked out of that office lighter than I'd felt in weeks. The weight of suspicion lifted, replaced by the surreal satisfaction of watching karma do its work in real time. Travis had tried to set the trap for me, but he'd basically left the instruction manual lying around for everyone to read. He wanted a promotion. What he got was security escorting him out with a cardboard box of his stuff. I have to admit, it takes a special kind of overconfidence to think you can manipulate accounting sheets and Slack chats without anyone catching on. He wanted me gone, but in the end, he was the one erased from the company drive. From office sabotage to family sabotage, this next one will make you want to lock your fridge at night. It started when I logged into my bank account one morning to make a routine bill payment. The balance was lower than it should have been, far lower. At first I thought maybe I'd miscalculated or a payment cleared early, but the withdrawal was obvious. Multiple transfers in neat round numbers, draining almost everything I'd carefully saved over the last 3 years. My heart dropped. I wasn't careless with money. I knew exactly what was supposed to be there, and it was gone. I did some digging and traced the transfers back to one very familiar name: my older brother. At first, I couldn't believe it. We'd had our ups and downs, sure, but stealing thousands out of my account? That was a line I never imagined he'd cross. I wanted to think maybe it was a mistake. Maybe he'd accidentally used my login somehow. But the transactions were deliberate, spaced out like he was trying to avoid detection. And then came the breaking point. Later that week, he showed up to a family dinner grinning ear to ear, flashing a shiny diamond ring on his girlfriend's hand. He'd proposed. The whole family clapped and cheered, and he gave this smug little speech about working extra shifts and finally making enough to give her the life she deserved. I sat there, trying not to choke on my food, because I knew exactly whose extra shifts had actually paid for that rock. This feels like a deleted scene from a sitcom. You're watching someone brag about their hard work while you can literally see the bank statement proving they're lying. He paraded that ring around the table, soaking in the praise, and every time he mentioned sacrifice and saving, it was like a knife twisting in my side. But that wasn't even the worst part. He had the audacity to nudge me under the table and whisper, "Don't say anything. It's all for love," as if stealing my future somehow became noble because he attached the word romantic to it. Imagine being this confidently wrong. So I made a decision right then. If he wanted to use my money for his grand performance, then I'd make sure the audience saw the whole play. I waited until dessert, when everyone was laughing and talking over each other. Then I cleared my throat and slid a neat stack of papers onto the table. Bank statements, transfer receipts, dates, amounts, and his name attached to every single one. The room went quiet in seconds. His fiancée leaned over first, confused, and then her smile dropped. She picked up the papers with shaking hands and read aloud the part where the funds left my account and went straight into his. The air in the room shifted from celebration to suffocating silence. My parents stared at him in horror, and he sputtered, "It's not what it looks like." And suddenly the whole plan fell apart. She ripped the ring off her finger and slammed it on the table. "So this wasn't your hard work? You stole from your own family to buy me jewelry?" Her voice was trembling with anger. She grabbed her coat and left before he could even stand up. The front door slammed like a gavel, ending the case. I almost felt bad for him in that moment, but only almost. He tried to chase after her, then turned back to me with this pitiful expression, as if I'd somehow betrayed him by telling the truth. That's the thing about people who rely on lies. They get so used to controlling the narrative that honesty feels like sabotage. My parents lit into him, furious not just about the theft, but about the embarrassment. Their son had turned what should have been a joyful dinner into a scandal. He tried to spin excuses, said he would have paid me back, that he was planning to surprise me later with some of the wedding budget, but nobody was buying it. The evidence was sitting right there on the table, undeniable. He ended up moving out within a week. My parents told him if he couldn't respect his own family, he wasn't welcome under their roof. His fiancée blocked him on everything. And me? I set up stricter protections on my accounts and slowly rebuilt my savings, knowing at least I'd never have to watch him bask in false glory again. He thought he could fund his fairy tale with my money and then spin it into a heroic story. but all he really did was write his own downfall, one transfer at a time. And if you thought stealing money was bad, wait until you hear about the roommate who weaponized kindness itself. Living with roommates is always a gamble. You think you know someone after a few dinners and shared chores, but you really don't see their true colors until you're splitting bills and hearing them clomp around the apartment at 2 a.m. My roommate, let's call her Jenna, came off as supportive at first. She was always asking about my job, congratulating me on promotions, even leaving sticky notes with little, "You got this" messages before big meetings. On the surface, she seemed like the kind of roommate people brag about having. But underneath, she was running a sabotage campaign that nearly destroyed me. It started with rumors at work. My manager pulled me aside one afternoon and said, "Hey, I don't want you to stress, but there's been some negative feedback coming through on our online pages, and your name's been mentioned." I felt my stomach drop. The company had public reviews, sure, but why would anyone single me out by name? I checked, and sure enough, there were posts claiming I was rude, unprofessional, and even creepy. None of it made sense. I prided myself on being overly polite, sometimes to a fault. At first, I shrugged it off as a fluke. But that wasn't even the worst part. The reviews kept coming. They got specific. They referenced shifts I'd worked, conversations I supposedly had, things that were close enough to reality to sound believable, but twisted just enough to make me look guilty. My boss asked me if something was going on in my personal life. Coworkers started giving me side eyes, like they were waiting for me to snap. And here's where it gets absurd. At home, Jenna was all sympathy. She'd pour me a glass of wine and say things like, "People can be so jealous when they see someone doing well." She nodded along when I vented about how unfair it was. She even suggested maybe I should take some time off for my mental health. She played the perfect friend. Meanwhile, my professional life was circling the drain, and I couldn't figure out why. Things went from bad to unhinged the day I borrowed Jenna's laptop because mine was updating. She'd left her email open. I wasn't snooping, but the notifications were impossible to ignore. There, in plain sight, were confirmations from review sites. Her account, her words. Entire paragraphs trashing me, signed off with little details only someone living with me could know. My hands actually shook as I scrolled through them, realizing every review that had wrecked my reputation had come straight from the girl sitting 10 feet away from me, humming along to her Spotify playlist. Imagine being this confidently wrong, pretending to be my biggest cheerleader, while actively trying to get me fired. It was so over the top, two-faced that I almost laughed. Almost. Then came the breaking point. Instead of blowing up at her right there, I played it smart. I turned my phone's recorder on and casually brought up the crazy reviews again that evening. I told her I was scared, that I didn't know what to do. She smirked like she couldn't help herself, and admitted it. Word for word, she confessed that she'd written them. She said she wanted me gone because she thought I was too smug about my career. She actually said that with a straight face. I let her talk, nodding along, my phone capturing every word. When she finally finished bragging about how clever she'd been, I had everything I needed. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. I sent the audio file to 3 people, our landlord, her employer, and her boyfriend. The fallout was nuclear. First came the landlord. He texted me within hours, thanking me for bringing it to his attention. Turns out Jenna had already been late on rent more than once, and this was the last straw. Her lease was terminated and she had 30 days to vacate. Then came her job. I don't know exactly what they said to her, but I know she didn't have a job there 2 days later. Apparently, posting defamatory reviews about another professional while claiming to represent integrity and customer trust wasn't exactly the brand image they wanted. And finally, the boyfriend. He called me personally to thank me for sending the proof. He'd suspected she was lying about other things, and this sealed it. He dumped her on the spot, blocking her on everything. So, in less than a week, Jenna lost her job, her apartment, and her relationship. She went from smugly sipping wine in our kitchen to sobbing in the hallway, packing boxes into her car while I watched from the window. This feels like a deleted scene from a sitcom. Someone tries so hard to destroy another person's life, only to trip over their own lies and lose everything themselves. She wanted me to fail, but in the end, she wrote the script for her own downfall. Which brings me to another roommate disaster, but this one ends with a courtroom showdown. Living with a roommate you barely know is always a gamble, but I never imagined mine would turn into a full-blown legal battle. When my lease started, I was excited. The apartment was small, sure, but it had a big kitchen and felt like the perfect place to start fresh. My new roommate, let's call her Lauren, seemed fine at first. Chatty, upbeat, a little disorganized, but nothing out of the ordinary. She swore up and down she was responsible, that she was great with bills and loved cooking. Famous last words. The first red flag popped up almost immediately. Rent was due and she forgot. Then it was, my paycheck is late. Then, I'll Venmo you Friday. Except Friday came and went. By the third month, I realized she hadn't paid me a single dime. I covered it each time because I didn't want to get hit with late fees or risk my own credit, but inside I was boiling. She was basically living rent-free while I worked overtime shifts just to stay afloat. But that wasn't even the worst part. Lauren cooked constantly, and when I say cooked, I mean she treated the kitchen like a Food Network audition. Frying chicken, bacon, sausages, oil splattering everywhere. I'd walk in and the counters would look like a grease bomb went off. She never cleaned, never wiped down anything, and when I confronted her about it, she'd wave me off with, "Relax, a little mess never killed anyone." Oh, the irony. Then came the breaking point. One night, I was in my room finishing up some work when I smelled smoke. I ran out to find the entire kitchen engulfed in flames. Lauren had left a pan of oil on the stove, cranked up to high, and then wandered off to take a shower. The fire leapt up the cabinets, black smoke poured across the ceiling, and the sprinklers went off. It was chaos, alarms blaring, water everywhere, neighbors evacuating. The fire department arrived in minutes and managed to contain it, but the kitchen was destroyed. The cabinets were charred, appliances melted, even part of the flooring buckled. And here's where it gets absurd. When the fire marshal asked what happened, Lauren shrugged and said she had no idea. She claimed the stove must have malfunctioned, that maybe I'd left something cooking. I stood there soaked, my heart still racing from dragging a fire extinguisher across the floor, and listened to a straight-up lie to a uniformed officer. Imagine being this confidently wrong, burning down your own kitchen and trying to pin it on someone else. The report didn't buy her story. The marshal wrote it down as grease fire caused by unattended pan of oil, even noting that Lauren admitted to using the stove earlier that evening. I kept a copy of the report, tucked it into a folder, and added photos I'd taken of the damage before repairs started. But Lauren wasn't done. She refused to pay for anything. Not rent, not damages, not even utilities. She acted like the fire was just an accident that the landlord's insurance should cover. And since accidents happen, she wasn't responsible. I genuinely thought this couldn't get worse. I was wrong. A month later, the landlord sent me an itemized bill for damages not covered by insurance. $12,000. Cabinets, flooring, repainting, appliance replacements, the whole 9 yards. And since Lauren and I were both on the lease, I was on the hook too. That's when patience snapped. I filed in small claims court. I wasn't going to let her skate by while I drowned in debt for a kitchen I didn't destroy. I gathered everything, the photos, the marshal's report, screenshots of her texts bragging about cooking up a storm right before the fire, even bank statements showing I'd been covering rent solo for months. I walked into that courtroom armed to the teeth. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. Lauren strutted in with no lawyer, no evidence, just a smug grin and a flimsy story about me being obsessed with blaming her. She told the judge I was making it all up because I wanted her out of the apartment. Then I pulled out the folder and laid every piece of evidence on the desk. The judge read the marshal's report twice, flipped through the photos, glanced at the text messages, and turned to Lauren with a look that said everything. "You're finished." And suddenly the whole plan fell apart. Her excuses crumbled under the weight of the evidence. The judge didn't just side with me. He ordered her to pay the full $12,000 in damages, plus the months of rent she'd skipped. The decision was final, enforceable, and when she tried to protest, the judge cut her off with a sharp, "You should be grateful this isn't criminal." She stormed out of the courtroom red-faced, and I walked out lighter than I'd felt in months. She'd tried to freeload, burn down the apartment, and gaslight me into taking the blame. In the end, she got exactly what she deserved: debt, humiliation, and a permanent note in the court record with her name on it. She thought she could burn the kitchen down and then somehow gaslight everyone into believing it wasn't her fault. But all she did was hand me the perfect case on a silver platter. But revenge doesn't always happen in court. Sometimes it happens in the middle of a wedding aisle. The story started in the days leading up to what should have been the happiest moment of his life. He was about to marry the woman he thought he'd spend forever with, surrounded by family, friends, and all the people who'd flown in just to see the two of them exchange vows. Everything looked perfect from the outside, flowers arranged, tux pressed, bride radiant. But behind that picture-perfect setup, he'd stumbled on something that shattered the whole illusion. It happened late one night when he borrowed her phone to look something up. A notification popped up from the best man, his supposed best friend, and curiosity turned into a pit in his stomach. He opened the thread and what he found was explicit, undeniable. Messages, pictures, whole conversations dripping with betrayal. They weren't even trying to hide it. They joked about sneaking around under his nose, about how he'd never find out. Reading it felt like a punch to the gut, but that wasn't even the worst part. He scrolled back and realized it had been going on for months, maybe longer. While he was planning a future with her, they were planning rendezvous behind his back. He thought about confronting her right then, calling the whole thing off, but as he sat there, an idea began to form. If she wanted to play games in secret, he was going to drag the truth into the spotlight. And here's where it gets absurd. Instead of exploding in private, he went through with the ceremony. He walked down the aisle, smiled for the cameras, stood at the altar with the best man right beside him and the bride glowing in her gown. Nobody in the audience had any idea of the storm brewing in his chest. People whispered about how calm he looked, but inside he was steel, ready to deliver the kind of public reckoning they'd never see coming. Then came the breaking point. The officiant asked them to share their vows. She went first, tearful, promising loyalty, love, and a lifetime of trust. Guests dabbed at their eyes, hearts swelling at the beautiful words. And when it was his turn, he pulled a folded paper from his pocket. At first, people thought it was his vows. It was, but not in the way anyone expected. He started reading aloud. Not promises, not poetry, but the exact text messages he'd found between his bride and his best man. Word for word. Gasps echoed through the hall as the meaning sank in. Lines about hotel rooms, lies told to cover their tracks, inside jokes at his expense. You could hear a pin drop between each sentence, broken only by the bride's strangled protests, and the best man shifting in his seat like he wanted to disappear. I can't lie, this feels like something straight out of a movie. Who expects wedding vows to turn into a live expose? But the timing couldn't have been more poetic. On the very day she was supposed to pledge honesty, he showed everyone exactly what her honesty looked like. And suddenly the whole plan fell apart. The bride's face went crimson, then pale. She sputtered, tried to grab the paper out of his hands, but he held firm, reading every last damning line. The best man slipped out a side door the moment people started whispering his name, too cowardly to face the fallout. Guests sat stunned, and then, slowly, applause broke out. A few family members even stood up and clapped. They weren't clapping for the vows, they were clapping for the truth finally being dragged into the light. The bride stormed out in tears, mascara streaking, her gown dragging behind her like the end of an era. He folded the paper neatly, slipped it back into his pocket, and turned to the crowd. Calmly, he said, "I think that concludes today's ceremony. Thank you all for coming." Then he walked away free. No marriage certificate, no divorce papers, no ties binding him to someone who had disrespected him so completely. Guests later told him it was the most unforgettable wedding they'd ever attended. Some said they felt bad for him, but more than anything, they admired the courage it took to confront betrayal in such a public, decisive way. Instead of hiding the shame, he handed it back to the people who had created it. You almost have to admire the precision. He didn't just confront them, he timed it for maximum impact, turning what should have been their triumphant day into their downfall. The bride lost her groom, the best man lost his friend, and everyone saw them for exactly who they were. That was brutal, but let's turn up the heat with food tampering that backfired in the worst way. The restaurant world is chaotic enough without adding sabotage into the mix, but of course there's always that one person who can't help themselves. At my job, that person was a server named Kyle. He had a cocky swagger, the kind of guy who thought rules were for everyone else. At first, his behavior seemed like harmless arrogance, bragging about tips, flirting with customers, showing up late and somehow avoiding consequences. But then the whispers started among the kitchen staff. He was eating food straight off customers' plates before serving them. The first time I saw it, I honestly thought my eyes were playing tricks. He came into the kitchen, grabbed a burger waiting on the pass, lifted the bun, and popped a fry into his mouth before carrying it out. I froze, spatula in hand. Did that just happen? Sure enough, 10 minutes later, he did it again with someone's pasta, twirling the fork for a taste test before wiping it on a napkin and tossing it in the dish pit. But that wasn't even the worst part. He bragged about it. To other servers, to the bartenders, even to a couple of regulars who thought he was joking. He'd grin and say, "They'll never notice if one fry's missing." Free perks of the job. The arrogance was unreal. Customers were paying good money for carefully plated dishes, and this guy was treating it like his personal buffet line. And here's where it gets absurd. Management never seemed to catch him. If anyone complained, he'd laugh it off or blame another server. The bosses thought he was charming, good with guests, and they didn't want to believe he could be a liability. Meanwhile, those of us in the kitchen were stuck watching him steal bites and feeling our blood boil. Then came the breaking point. A family sent back a plate of wings because something tasted weird. Kyle had been the one to run that order, and we all knew what had happened. My boss gave me a look like, "Don't even start," but I couldn't shake the disgust anymore. That's when I decided to take matters into my own hands. If Kyle wanted free samples, I was going to give him a buffet he'd never forget. I prepped 2 special plates during the next busy shift, 1 burger, 1 pasta. The burger looked perfect on the outside, but I slathered the patty with a thick layer of wasabi mayo, the kind that clears your sinuses in one bite. The pasta? I loaded it with an unholy amount of ghost pepper oil and topped it off with fake truffle essence that smelled fancy, but tasted rancid if you had more than a microdose. Sure enough, Kyle strutted in, picked up the burger and, like clockwork, lifted the bun for his sample. He took a huge bite of a fry coated in the mayo, chewed twice and immediately started coughing. His eyes watered, his face turned red, and he bolted for the sink to gulp down water. The line cooks nearly dropped their knives trying not to laugh, and suddenly the whole plan fell apart for him. Because right after the burger fiasco, he grabbed the pasta dish. He twirled up a big forkful, shoveled it into his mouth, and instantly gagged. He staggered into the dining room, coughing and hiccuping, tears streaming down his face. Customers turned to stare as he tried to act casual, sweat pouring down his temples. This feels like a deleted scene from a sitcom, like if you told me a waiter choked on spicy pasta in front of 30 people while pretending everything was fine. I'd say that was too over the top. But there he was, putting on the performance of his life and failing miserably. Here's where it got even better. The whole thing was caught on camera. Our restaurant had surveillance over the pass line. For safety management watched him lift the bun, grab the fry, choke on it, then repeat the exact same move with the pasta. They called him into the office that same night. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. Kyle tried to spin it like he was just checking the food for quality, but the footage left no room for excuses. Customers had seen him gagging, staff had witnessed it firsthand, and the spice was unmistakable. Management finally realized he'd been a liability all along. He was fired on the spot. No 2 weeks' notice, no sympathy, just clean out your locker. The rest of us in the kitchen felt a wave of satisfaction. For months we'd been watching him disrespect the job, the food, and the people paying for it. Now he was out, brought down not by some formal complaint, but by his own greed and arrogance. Imagine being this confidently wrong, thinking you can steal from customers' plates and never get caught, only to literally choke on your own behavior in front of everyone. Kyle thought he was untouchable, but in the end, the spice did all the talking. And speaking of cameras, the next story shows how surveillance caught more than anyone bargained for. For months, I couldn't figure out why my front lawn kept looking like a mini landfill every other morning. Old pizza boxes, crumpled fast food bags, even half-empty bottles of soda. Stuff that clearly didn't come from my house. At first, I thought maybe random kids were just tossing things while walking home. Or maybe the trash truck was dropping scraps when it came through. But the pattern was too specific. Every week, like clockwork, more garbage appeared, always in the same corner of my yard. I started waking up earlier, peeking out the window, but never saw anything. It was like the trash just materialized overnight. That's when suspicion kicked in, and I realized there was only one possible culprit: my next-door neighbor, Dan. He was the kind of guy who always looked for shortcuts, parking in other people's driveways, mowing just enough of his lawn to not get fined, and bragging about how he never paid extra for trash pickup. It all started clicking together. But that wasn't even the worst part. Dan would stand in his yard during the day, chatting casually, asking if I was having trouble with raccoons. He said it with a straight face while I was pretty sure he was the raccoon. The man had the audacity to pretend he was helping me solve the mystery he was actively creating. Imagine being this confidently wrong. And here's where it gets absurd. I decided to set up a hidden camera. Nothing high-tech, just a small motion-activated one tucked into a flower pot aimed at the side of the lawn. It blended right in. For a few days, nothing happened, and I started wondering if maybe I was wrong. Then, at exactly 2 a.m., on a Wednesday, the camera caught him. Dan, in pajama pants and slippers, tiptoeing across the grass with a giant trash bag slung over his shoulder, like some deranged Santa Claus. He plopped it down, looked around, and waddled back to his house like it was the most normal routine in the world. I watched the footage 3 times just to make sure my eyes weren't playing tricks. Nope. There he was. The mystery raccoon had a receding hairline and bad slippers. Then came the breaking point. Instead of confronting him face to face, I uploaded the footage straight to our community Facebook page with the caption, "Mystery solved." Turns out raccoons wear plaid pajama pants. Within minutes, the comments exploded. Neighbors were tagging each other, sharing laughing emojis, and demanding the HOA step in. Some even shared their own stories of finding stray bags in their yards and realizing it all traced back to Dan. And suddenly, the whole plan fell apart for him. The HOA didn't just slap him with a warning. They fined him thousands of dollars for repeated violations. The evidence was undeniable, and since it was public, he couldn't even spin it as a misunderstanding. His wife was mortified. People started whispering about how she'd been begging him to stop cutting corners for years, and now he'd embarrassed her in front of the entire neighborhood. Within a month, she packed up and left, telling anyone who'd listen that she was done living with a trash man. Karma's timing is just too comical. He wanted to save a few bucks on trash pickup, and instead he lost thousands in fines, his standing in the community, and his marriage. He basically dug his own grave and then tripped right into it. But if you think that's messy, the next one is downright filthy, literally involving someone's toothbrush. It started with a stupid argument, the kind of fight couples have when they're both stressed. We were in the bathroom, voices raised, when she suddenly blurted out something so insane I thought I misheard. She actually laughed, and said, "Oh, and by the way, I've been cleaning the toilet with your toothbrush for months." She grinned like she'd just delivered the punchline of a joke. At first I froze. My brain went into overdrive, trying to figure out if she was bluffing. Who even says something like that in the middle of a fight? But she doubled down, smirking and adding, "Don't look so shocked. It's just a prank." My stomach turned. Months. That meant every single time I brushed my teeth, I might have been scrubbing with bacteria from the one place nobody wants to think about. But that wasn't even the worst part. She didn't look guilty at all. No apology, no, I was just kidding. She thought it was funny. She strutted out of the bathroom like she'd won the argument because she'd dropped the grossest mic imaginable. I stood there staring at my toothbrush in the cup, horrified, realizing I could never trust her or anything in that bathroom again. And here's where it gets absurd. Later that night, I confronted her again, asking if she was serious. Instead of walking it back, she laughed harder and bragged about doing it multiple times. She said she liked watching me brush afterward because it made her feel in control. That wasn't a prank. That was cruelty with a smile. Imagine being this confidently twisted, thinking humiliation equals humor. Then came the breaking point. I needed proof. If she could admit this once, she could deny it later. So while she was out the next day, I swapped my regular electric toothbrush with a decoy and set up a small camera in the bathroom. Nothing fancy, just enough to cover the sink and toilet area. I brushed with the decoy for a few days, waiting. Sure enough, the footage came in. On a quiet Tuesday, she walked into the bathroom, picked up my toothbrush, scrubbed the inside of the toilet bowl like it was a dish sponge, rinsed it lightly, and set it right back in the cup. She even hummed while she did it, like this was just part of her routine. Watching the clip, I actually felt my jaw drop. It's one thing to hear someone admit to something disgusting. It's another to watch them commit the act with zero hesitation. And suddenly the whole plan fell apart for her. Because I wasn't going to keep that video to myself, I sent it to her parents first. Her mum called me almost instantly, horrified, apologizing through tears while her dad muttered something about being ashamed. Then I shared it with her close group of friends, most of whom had once defended her as quirky. The reactions were priceless: disbelief, disgust, and then a tidal wave of messages cutting her off. Finally, I made sure her new boyfriend got the file too. He didn't even reply, just blocked her and moved on. The fallout was nuclear. She tried to spin it as a harmless joke, but nobody bought it. Parents embarrassed, friends ghosted her, boyfriend gone. She called me screaming, saying I'd ruined her life. But the truth was, she'd done that herself the second she decided to weaponize my toothbrush. I packed up my things and moved out within the week, leaving her behind in a cloud of humiliation she couldn't scrub away. Every time I think back on it, I still shake my head. She thought she was clever, but in the end, all she did was expose her own cruelty. You have to admire the sheer self-destruction. She wanted control, and instead she handed me all the evidence I needed to end the relationship and her reputation in one move. And from disgusting bathrooms to corporate betrayal, here's one that ends in poetic justice. My old boss loved to brag about being the hardest worker in the company. He wore it like a badge, constantly dropping hints that he was sending emails at midnight or staying until 10 p.m. To wrap things up, at first, I actually admired him. I thought, okay, this guy really cares. But after a while, it became obvious something didn't add up. He'd leave the office at the same time as everyone else, yet somehow his inbox would light up with messages hours after he was gone. It wasn't just me noticing either. The team would joke about it in whispers. Does he sleep? Does his wife ever see him? He'd smirk whenever someone mentioned it, pretending to be modest while clearly loving the reputation. But that wasn't even the worst part. He used it against us. In meetings, he'd compare our output to his so-called after-hours grind, telling leadership that maybe we weren't as committed. That stung, because the truth was we were doing the heavy lifting while he found new ways to take credit. And here's where it gets absurd. I managed the company's productivity software. I could see when people were actually logged in, what projects were active, and how long tasks took. It wasn't about micromanaging. It was a tool to track project efficiency. And when I checked the logs, the truth about my boss smacked me in the face. He wasn't working late at all. He was using the schedule send feature on his email. He'd write a bunch of drafts during the day, then set them to auto-send throughout the night to make it look like he was grinding around the clock. Imagine being this confidently lazy. Not only was he lying, but he was building his whole reputation on it. And then came the breaking point. Performance evaluations. The higher-ups wanted hard numbers on productivity, and he volunteered to present first. He swaggered into the room with a slideshow full of cherry-picked screenshots, emails at 2 a.m., notes about his dedication, a narrative that painted him as the engine of the department. I sat quietly, folder in hand, waiting. Then came my turn. I didn't need fancy slides. I had data. Cold, hard data. I laid out the team's contributions in charts, showing exactly who was logging in, completing projects, and hitting deadlines. Every number told the same story. The team carried the weight, and the boss's supposed after-hours work was nothing but smoke and mirrors. But that wasn't even the best part. I showed the pattern of his scheduled emails. Every message sent at midnight was drafted at 3 p.m. I even pulled one hilarious example where he'd replied to a client at 11:47 p.m., but had accidentally included a time-stamped attachment created 6 hours earlier. The room went silent except for the sound of him shifting in his chair. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. HR didn't just take notes, they asked me to send over the full report. The director leaned back, glanced at him and said, "We'll discuss your role after this meeting." He tried to stammer something about work-life balance and trying to set a good example, but the evidence was too overwhelming. And suddenly the whole plan fell apart. By the end of the week, he was out, officially terminated for falsifying work records and misrepresenting team performance. The kicker? Leadership redistributed his salary into raises for the rest of us. It wasn't life-changing money, but it felt like poetic justice, watching the man who'd hogged credit lose everything, while the people he'd undermined finally got rewarded. I genuinely thought I couldn't be surprised anymore, but watching him clean out his desk while we quietly celebrated was surreal. He wanted to look like a hero, but all he did was expose how little he actually contributed. That's corporate karma, but family karma hits even harder. When I announced I was getting married, my stepbrother immediately assumed he'd be my best man. He didn't ask, didn't even suggest it gently. He outright demanded it, as if the role belonged to him by default. I was stunned. This was a guy who had barely spoken to me for most of my life. We didn't grow up together, we didn't hang out, and outside of mandatory family holidays, we were basically strangers. Yet suddenly, he thought he had a front row seat to one of the biggest moments of my life. I told him gently but firmly that my best friend since childhood already had the role. That's when he exploded. He accused me of disrespecting family ties and claimed it was humiliating for him not to stand beside me at the altar. He tried to spin it like I owed him, even though he'd never been there for me during breakups, graduations, or even birthdays. But that wasn't even the worst part. He didn't stop at complaining in private. He tried to rally the rest of my family against me. He went around calling me ungrateful, painting himself as the victim who had been cruelly pushed aside by his younger stepbrother. Suddenly, relatives I hadn't spoken to in years were calling me, asking why I wasn't keeping peace in the family. Imagine being this confidently entitled, thinking neglect magically turns into loyalty the moment wedding rolls are on the table. And here's where it gets absurd. I finally sat down with him and spelled it out. You can't demand to be someone's best man if you've never acted like a brother. I listed every holiday he skipped, every event he ignored, and every time he'd been too busy to even send a text. His face went red, but instead of apologizing, he doubled down. He said, "This wedding is my chance to show everyone I matter." That was the moment I realized this had nothing to do with me and everything to do with his ego. Then came the breaking point. I decided to take the story public. I wrote a long post online laying out the facts, not in a bitter way, but simply explaining why my best friend was my best man and why my stepbrother's sudden interest felt hollow. The post blew up. Thousands of people weighed in, validating what I already knew. Being related by marriage doesn't entitle someone to your trust or your milestones. The overwhelming support made it impossible for him to keep pushing the family narrative that I was being unfair. And suddenly, the whole plan fell apart for him. Relatives who had originally pressured me backed off after reading the thread. My parents told him flat out that his behavior was embarrassing, not mine. When the wedding day arrived, he didn't even show up. He boycotted the ceremony entirely, sending a dramatic text about how I'd regret it someday. But when I stood at the altar, surrounded by the people who had actually been there for me, I felt nothing but relief. The best part? Guests cheered when my best friend gave his speech, filled with years of inside jokes and heartfelt moments that my stepbrother could never have delivered. The room was full of laughter and joy, not drama. In the end, it was clear to everyone that the right person stood beside me. This feels like poetic justice at its finest. Someone who tried to force their way into my life ended up exposing just how little they actually mattered to it. He wanted a spotlight, but all he got was silence. From family drama to dating disasters, let's jump into a betrayal that ends with public humiliation. We'd been planning the trip for months. Sun, beaches, the works. She was the one who pitched the idea, but somehow I ended up paying for almost everything. Flights, hotel, excursions. She framed it as, "You make more money, it's fair," and I went along with it because I thought we were building memories together. That illusion shattered the moment we landed. At the airport, as we were grabbing our luggage, she looked at me with this casual shrug and said, "Actually, I think I need space. Let's take this trip separately." My brain short-circuited. We hadn't even left baggage claim, and she was already ditching me. She said it like it was no big deal, like leaving me standing there alone with a suitcase full of matching outfits was just part of the plan. But that wasn't even the worst part. She didn't just want space. She made it clear she planned to use the hotel, the excursions, and all the bookings I'd already paid for. She said, "It'll be less awkward if we don't hang out. You can do your thing, I'll do mine." Basically, she wanted a free solo vacation on my dime. Imagine being this confidently selfish. And here's where it gets absurd. I didn't yell, I didn't argue. I nodded, helped her grab her bag, and played along. But while she was busy calling a cab to head to the hotel, I slipped out of the terminal and pulled up the airline app. The return ticket was booked under my account. With 2 taps, I cancelled hers. Non-refundable. No credit, no rebooking. Gone. Then came the breaking point. I checked into the hotel we were supposed to share, reservation under my name, of course, and settled into the suite. Later that night, I got a text from her asking why the keycard wasn't working. I replied, "Oh, right. The booking's under my name, remember? I thought you wanted space." The flood of angry messages that followed was pure comedy. She accused me of being petty, cruel, even abandoning her. I simply reminded her that she was the one who dumped me at the airport and insisted on going her own way. And suddenly the whole plan fell apart for her. A few days in, I learned through mutual friends that she had called her parents in tears, begging for money to buy a last-minute flight home. Apparently, her family wasn't thrilled about bailing her out, especially after they heard how she'd tried to manipulate me into paying for her vacation. She eventually scraped together enough to leave, but not before racking up debt and spending days couch surfing with acquaintances she barely knew in a foreign country. This feels like poetic justice wrapped in sunburn. She thought she could humiliate me, enjoy a luxury getaway for free, and walk away unscathed. Instead, she stranded herself. I enjoyed the rest of the trip solo, relaxing by the pool, booking spa sessions, eating dinners for one that tasted better than any date we'd ever had. And when I flew home comfortably in my prepaid seat, I couldn't help but smile knowing she was stuck scrambling at the check-in counter. She wanted space, and I gave her all the space in the world, 3,000 miles of it. But not all revenge is quick. Sometimes it takes years to cook. Back in high school, there was one teacher who made my life miserable. He wasn't just strict or demanding. He was cruel in a way that felt personal. He'd mock students in front of the class, call kids lazy if they didn't get perfect grades, and even once told me I wasn't college material after I bombed a test. It stuck with me for years. Every time I thought about those classrooms, I felt that same old humiliation creeping back. Fast forward nearly a decade, and I'm scrolling through a niche forum where people in education swap stories. I see a username I vaguely recognize, and then it hits me. It's him, my former teacher, posting under a thinly veiled handle that still had his initials. At first I thought, no way! But the writing style, the references to my old school district, even the smug tone, it all lined up. But that wasn't even the worst part. He wasn't just chatting casually, he was bragging about falsifying grades to teach lessons, boasting about failing students he didn't like, or inflating grades for kids whose parents he wanted to impress. He wrote about manipulating gradebooks like it was some kind of game, and he wasn't careful either. He dropped enough details that anyone with basic context could piece together exactly who he was. And here's where it gets absurd. He posted a story about giving a student a deliberately failing grade because the kid needed to be knocked down a peg. He gloated about how the student cried in front of the whole class and how character building it was. Reading it, my blood boiled. It wasn't just me. This was a pattern. He had been using his position to bully kids and pat himself on the back for it. Then came the breaking point. I screenshotted everything. Every post, every comment, every timestamp. I compiled them into a neat file and sent it anonymously to the school district's Board of Education. I didn't even have to explain much. His own words were enough. They opened an investigation, and from what I heard through old classmates, it wasn't long before they connected the dots. And suddenly the whole plan fell apart for him. The district audited years of his gradebooks and found discrepancies all over the place. Some students had been unfairly failed, others mysteriously boosted. He couldn't explain it away because his own online confessions spelled out his intentions. Within months, he was fired, not quietly but publicly enough that parents knew exactly why. This feels like justice served ice cold. He spent years humiliating kids who couldn't defend themselves, and in the end, his own arrogance exposed him. He thought no one would ever find his little online rants, but the internet never forgets. The irony? That same teacher once lectured us about how everything online leaves a footprint. He wasn't wrong, he just never thought the footprint that got him fired would be his own. And if you think teachers abusing power is shocking, wait for the landlord who pushed too far. It started with a knock on my door that didn't feel right. My landlord stood there, red-faced and jittery, holding a stack of papers that looked more like something printed off Word than anything official. He shoved them at me and announced, "You've got 30 days to get out." I blinked because I knew for a fact I was up to date on rent. No complaints, no violations. I asked him why, and he just smirked, muttering something about wanting new tenants who'll pay more. At first, I thought maybe he was bluffing. But then, 2 days later, I came home from work to find the locks changed. No warning, no notice. Just my stuff trapped inside like I'd been robbed. My stomach dropped. I knew enough about tenant rights to realize this was way out of line. He wasn't following the law, he was strong-arming me out of my home. But that wasn't even the worst part. When I confronted him, recording on my phone, he straight up threatened me. He said if I made noise about it, he'd toss all my belongings into the street. He leaned in like he thought intimidation would shut me up. Instead, it just gave me all the evidence I needed. Imagine being this confidently reckless, committing crimes while your tenant is literally filming you. And here's where it gets absurd. I didn't yell, I didn't argue. I called the housing authority first thing the next morning and handed them the recordings. Lock changes, threats, everything on video. They didn't just take a report, they launched a full investigation. Turns out I wasn't his first victim. He'd been pulling stunts like this with other tenants too, trying to bully people out so he could jack up rent for new ones. Then came the breaking point. Inspectors arrived unannounced and demanded access to the building. He tried to act tough at first, but when they pulled out the paperwork and cited the specific laws he'd broken, he looked like a deer in headlights. They didn't just fine him, they hit him with multiple violations that stacked up fast, and suddenly the whole plan fell apart for him. His landlord license was suspended pending review, and he was ordered to pay damages for the illegal eviction attempt. That included reimbursing me for hotel costs and lost wages from the days I couldn't get into my apartment. I got my locks restored, plus a written guarantee I wouldn't face another eviction without due process. I can't lie, watching him realize the game was over was deeply satisfying. He went from cocky and threatening to begging inspectors for leniency in under 5 minutes. He thought he was untouchable, but the moment the law stepped in, he folded like a cheap card table. He wanted me out to make a quick buck, and instead he lost his license, thousands in fines, and his reputation with the housing authority. That's what happens when arrogance meets accountability. Speaking of money lost, this next one involves a lottery ticket and betrayal that will leave your jaw on the floor. It was just an ordinary stop at the gas station before work. I grabbed a coffee, some gum, and on a whim, a scratch-off ticket. I don't usually buy them, but something in me said, why not? By the time I got to my desk, I scratched it out of boredom and nearly dropped my coin when I saw the numbers line up. $10,000. I double-checked, triple-checked. It was real. My heart was racing, but I figured I'd stash it safely in my drawer until lunch. When I came back from a quick meeting, the ticket was gone. My drawer was still open, papers shifted around. My stomach sank. I turned around, and wouldn't you know it, my coworker Tina was casually waving the ticket, smiling like she'd just solved a mystery. She held it up and said, "Oh, you must have mistaken this for yours. I bought this one this morning." I thought I misheard her. She wasn't just stealing it. She was trying to gaslight me into thinking it was hers all along. She went on about how she always bought scratchers at that gas station, and maybe I had confused it with one of mine. The arrogance was unreal. Imagine being this confidently wrong, holding something you literally saw me scratching minutes earlier and pretending it's yours. But that wasn't even the worst part. She marched straight to our manager's office, ticket in hand, telling everyone she'd just won and she might need time off to claim her prize. I stood there in disbelief as half the office gathered to congratulate her. People were patting her on the back, and she soaked up the attention like it was her birthright. Meanwhile, I felt like I was in some kind of bad prank show. And here's where it gets absurd. I didn't panic. I went straight to HR. Our office had cameras everywhere, including one aimed directly at my cubicle. I calmly asked for the footage, and when we played it back, there she was, walking into my cubicle while I was in the meeting, rummaging through my desk, pulling out the ticket, and slipping it into her folder. Then later, waltzing back over to wave it in my face. Open and shut theft caught in glorious high definition. Then came the breaking point. I didn't just want my ticket back, I pressed charges. HR called the police, and by the end of the day, Tina was being escorted out of the building in handcuffs. The look on her face when she realized the footage sealed her fate was priceless. All that smug confidence drained away in seconds. And suddenly the whole plan fell apart for her. She wasn't just fired on the spot, she was charged with theft. My ticket was returned to me, validated by the lottery office, and the winnings were mine. Tina, meanwhile, had to explain to her family, her friends, and the whole office how she'd managed to get herself arrested over a scratch-off she didn't even buy. I genuinely thought this couldn't get worse for her, but later I heard she'd bragged to relatives about the big win, before it all came crashing down. She had to walk that back too. Karma didn't just knock, it kicked the door in with receipts. That 10 grand felt nice, but honestly, watching her arrogance implode in real time was worth even more. She thought she'd written the script for her victory lap, but the cameras wrote the real ending. Now let's zoom back to relationships, because this next one is straight nightmare fuel. When I first started dating him, he seemed supportive of my career. He'd ask about my projects, say he was proud of me, even bring me coffee when I was grinding late nights. But once I got a big promotion opportunity on the horizon, his attitude started to shift. He'd make little comments. "You're working too much. Do you really think you can handle that job?" The kind of remarks you brush off until you realize they're not jokes. Then came the emails. My boss called me in one morning, looking tense, and asked if everything was okay. She showed me a message supposedly from my account, complaining about the workload, calling co-workers useless, and saying I was considering quitting. My jaw dropped. I hadn't written any of it. I checked my sent folder. Empty. Whoever sent it had masked it well. But that wasn't even the worst part. More messages started trickling in over the next week, all under my name. Some subtle digs at management, others more aggressive. I could feel my boss's trust slipping with every new email. My stomach churned at the thought that someone was actively trying to destroy the career I'd built. And then a sickening possibility hit me. What if it was him? And here's where it gets absurd. I set up a trace, rerouting my email traffic through a system that logged IP addresses. Sure enough, the next anonymous email sent under my name pinged from the Wi-Fi in my own apartment. The culprit wasn't a hacker across the globe. It was the guy sitting on my couch. He'd been sending poison pen notes behind my back, trying to make me look unstable so I'd lose my job and stay dependent on him. Then came the breaking point. I didn't confront him at home. I walked into HR with a folder full of printouts. Every email, every IP trace, every log. My boss's eyes widened as she realized the messages hadn't been me at all. HR scheduled a meeting with him present under the pretense of a clarification. When they slid the proof across the table, his face drained of color. He tried to stammer excuses, said it was a prank that got out of hand, but nobody was buying it. And suddenly the whole plan fell apart for him. I broke up with him right there, in front of HR, leaving no room for another word. He slunk out of the building, humiliated, while my boss turned to me and said, "You've handled this with incredible composure." The investigation cleared my name completely, and a few weeks later I was officially promoted. The very thing he tried to sabotage ended up skyrocketing my career. He wanted to keep me small, and instead he handed me the evidence I needed to grow bigger than ever. He lost the relationship, the little power he thought he had, and any claim to being supportive. Meanwhile, I gained a title, a raise, and a story my co-workers still talk about whenever office gossip comes up. And for our last story tonight, here's the revenge that wraps everything with a delicious full circle. I've always loved gardening. Not the rigid, perfect rows of trimmed hedges kind of gardening, but the messy, colorful kind. Wildflowers spilling over the edge of the yard, bees buzzing happily, butterflies drifting in and out. It wasn't just a hobby for me, it was my therapy. Every evening after work, I'd sit outside, dirt under my nails, proud of how my yard looked alive instead of sterile. Enter my neighbor, Janet. She hated it. She made that clear from day one. While other neighbors complimented the blooms, Janet would sneer and call it weeds. She told me I was bringing down property values, and once joked that my garden looked like an abandoned lot. The kicker? She had a patchy lawn, 2 plastic flamingos faded to a dull pink, and a dead shrub she never watered. But somehow, my flowers were the problem. But that wasn't even the worst part. She escalated. She went to the HOA and filed a complaint, claiming my garden was unsightly. She even started a petition, trying to rally neighbors into forcing me to rip it all out. Imagine being this confidently wrong, going after butterflies and bees like they're a neighborhood crime. And here's where it gets absurd. Instead of backing her, most neighbors came straight to me. They loved the flowers. They said my yard was the one spot on the block that actually had character. A few even admitted their kids liked watching the butterflies. That's when I realized if Janet wanted a war, she picked the wrong battlefield. I started gathering signatures not against her directly, but in support of my garden. Then came the breaking point. During the HOA's review, I showed up with a folder. Dozens of signatures, photos of the garden buzzing with pollinators, and even a letter from a local conservation group praising it as eco-friendly. The HOA board looked impressed. Janet, meanwhile, showed up with nothing but a handful of bitter complaints and a stack of printed-out evidence that was literally just pictures of my flowers. And suddenly the whole plan fell apart for her. Not only did the HOA dismiss her complaint, they turned the tables and inspected her property. Turns out, while she'd been so busy pointing fingers, She'd racked up violations of her own: broken fencing, junk piled in the side yard, and a shed built without a permit. The fines stacked up fast. Within months, she couldn't keep up with the penalties and the social fallout. The neighbors she tried to rally against me started avoiding her altogether. Eventually, I saw the "for sale" sign go up in her yard. By the end of the season, she was gone. The best part? The HOA officially recognized my garden as a community beautification project. What she tried to destroy ended up becoming a badge of pride for the neighborhood. Now kids stop by with their parents to look at the blooms, and even the mail carrier tells me it's her favorite house on the route. This feels like karma blooming in real time. She tried to uproot me, and instead, she uprooted herself. And that's where we'll stop tonight. Justice served in every messy corner of life, from bedrooms to boardrooms. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're a true night owl of Reddit drama. So take a deep breath, let the madness settle, and remember, tomorrow brings new stories, new karma, and new poetic justice. Sweet dreams, everyone. And remember, sometimes revenge is the best lullaby.